Good afternoon and a warm welcome to the Kibble CYCnet 2018 webinar series, brought to you by Learning and Development at Kibble Education and Care, Paisley, Scotland. My name is Evelyn Fitzpatrick and I'm your host for today's webinar, along with my co-pilot, Marie Duncan. We are absolutely delighted to be welcoming you to today's webinar with our speaker, Tonya Hotchkin, Director of Clinical Care, Tanager Place. Today's webinar is entitled From Trauma to Resilience. This is the fourth session in the Kibble CYCnet webinar series, and it's a genuinely enlightening presentation, focusing on the journey of healing from trauma to resilience. I'd now like to hand you over to Tonya Hotchkin to start today's webinar.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. I'm so excited to be with you and talk with each of you about From Trauma to Resilience today. I can't see any of you, which is a new thing for me. I've never done a webinar. So I'm just picturing right now, I have like a picture in my mind of an arena of very beautiful, handsome people in front of me smiling. So I'm going to go with that for the rest of the hour, since all I can see is a screen, which for me is not relational based, so this will be a little bit more difficult for me, so bear with me as I do this. Usually I love the energy of the room, so I'll be trying to connect to the chat box to feel some of that energy. It's such an honor to facilitate the learning today around trauma and resilience. These two topics are really near and dear to my heart. When I started to do the work, I was actually a clinician in a local school here in my community. And at the time, the community school asked me to come in and do a training. And really what they wanted a training on was mental health. And I had asked them, what along the lines of mental health are you really wanting training on? And they said, what we're seeing in the classroom are significant behavioral struggles. We're seeing things like oppositional defiance. We're seeing things like conduct, ADHD. So can you come talk with us about those diagnoses? And I showed up my first training and I showed them this slide. So I showed up with the first slide that you're going to see here that really talked about that I was not going to speak about any diagnosis that day, because I felt like that would be really unfair to the students and the children that they worked with, because those students are filled with a life of a story. They're filled with experiences that that explain a lot of what is going on for them. So to simply just talk about a diagnosis in a list of symptoms did not give the whole picture of who they were as human beings. And so instead I showed up with this slide with a lot of foundational work by Dr. Siegel that said that we all at any given time in our life are on a spectrum from mental wellness or mental well-being to mental health struggles or mental illness. And that there are a variety of things that can influence that spectrum. What we know about youth and about children is that their economic factors, so their social economic status, can greatly influence their brain development and can influence their mental wellness. I think all the time about early access to care, and I know that children who have less financial abilities or less resources or less education in their communities toward early access and early intervention, that it will absolutely influence their mental wellness. I also talk about generational. I am an LMFT, which means I am a marriage and family therapist. And so systems theory is something that is very near and dear to my heart. And what I mean by that is that I believe very deep in my core that parents try the best they can with what resources they have. But we know that a lot of this youth that we're working with have parents that also struggled. And the reason for that is because we typically do what we know. So we do parent how we have been parented. And unless we have significant education and resources, it's really hard to break that cycle. So I'm really cautious when I talk about trauma and resilience, because we're going to talk about adverse experiences today. And typically that means that children are in a home in which they are being exposed to those toxic stressors. And I want to be really cautious because I want to give parents grace and give parents love, because I really think parents wake up every morning wanting to be the best parent they can be. But we do know that this generational cycle and the idea of epigenetics can influence the wellness of youth and their development. And then the last two kind of go hand in hand, that a child's environment and a child's experiences absolutely start to influence who they become. And we're going to talk about that a lot this morning when we do this presentation, because I say all the time, we're not just a turn on, turn off brain. So if my life experiences and my environment has been made up of chaos or dysfunction or lack of structure or lack of regulation and nurturance, it's really hard for me to navigate life having those skills and those brain abilities to navigate in a way that is adaptive and healthy and pro-social. Because we are primarily just an input brain during our younger youth. And so my experiences and my environment become the way that my brain starts to perceive myself, others, and the world around me. So when we talk about well-being and we talk about mental health and we talk about trauma, we're talking about a child's story. And so we're really going to take a deep look at what is that story and how can we be curious about that story so we can offer the most opportunities towards resilience. A lot of people have heard about the ACE study, which when I started to do this work 10 years ago, it wasn't very popular, so it warms my heart to know that the majority of people have heard of ACEs. So I'm not going to go in depth to ACEs, but what we know and what the ACE research looks at is that when children are exposed to adverse experiences or something that we call toxic stress early on in life, that it influences their brain development, it influences their neural development, which ultimately then climbs up the pyramid here, that it influences social, emotional, and cognitive skills. So a lot of times I show a video during this part, which we won't show today, but I want you to have the resource and use later, and it's called Brain Builders. And what Brain Builders really looks at is that when children are exposed to i.e. the right ingredients or the right recipes early on in life, that the way that their brain develops really helps them be successful for later life tasks. However, when children are exposed to stress, or in particularly toxic stress, similarly, it influences their brain, but in a way that leaves more synaptic connections disconnected, or neural pathways that are not rooted in wellness. And so I think this is really important, because when you see the next area of the pyramid, it talks about social emotional. And for a lot of you who are educators or working with youth, we know that social emotional skills are really the foundation toward all learning and all success. And so a lot of times when we talk about the ACE study, I say if you really look at brain scans of a child who's been exposed to adverse experiences or trauma versus a child who has not, you will see that actual brain functioning looks different. So it does change the lens in which we wear from children are choosing their behavior and children are wanting to be manipulative to their brain actually does not have particular connections that are helping them be as successful. The beautiful thing, and the thing that we'll talk a lot about today, is that of resilience. And although maybe that the early developing brain doesn't have those connections, there is hope, because you and the work that you do can start to create new connections and connections that help someone mitigate the effects of toxic stress and start to live a resilient, healthy life. So that's really, really exciting. What we're going to do now is a short poll. And what the poll is going to ask you is what experiences in childhood could affect children and contribute to the adverse behaviors that they may be demonstrating. So I know Evelyn is going to put this poll up. If you would be so kind and engaging to think about some things that may influence a child and the behaviors that they start to exhibit throughout their life. Yes, domestic violence, some absent parenting, parental separation. I'm loving the answers. So some unsafe neighborhoods, yes, absolutely. When we have children living in neighborhoods in which they don't feel safe, it absolutely influences their brain and then the behaviors that they have. Grief and loss. I think that one's really important and one that we can often forget about. I talk often about when children have had chronic losses or transient lifestyles or significant medical issues in their family. It can absolutely influence coming into care. Yeah, so coming into residential or PMIC facilities, removal from a home. This is great. I love it. This is wonderful. Pre-birth trauma. Yeah, there's a lot of current research out there that is looking at actually in utero and even some changes in brain functioning when a child is in utero to a mother who has a desired pregnancy versus an undesired pregnancy. I know that literature is really new, but it's so fascinating to me to really look at how these experiences can start to influence a child's life, a child's development, their brain, and ultimately who they are in the world around them and in relationships. So I love the feedback and I hope that that continues to bring ideas and thoughts to people as we continue this work. So Eve, we're going to move on to the next slide. A lot of people will ask me then, Tonya, what is trauma? We know pretty well what adverse experiences are, but what is trauma? And the best way that I have to describe trauma is that it is any experience that leaves a person feeling helpless, hopeless, kind of in survival mode, or really in what we call their downstairs brain, feeling like they have no control over that experience. So I often say there's no scorecard when it comes to trauma, and I think that that is really important because I have worked with a lot of children who maybe have 1 or 0 ACE as their score, but could qualify for having post-traumatic stress disorder, and children who have maybe 8, 9 of the ACEs and don't exhibit symptoms related to trauma. So the way I describe it is that ACEs, or adverse experiences, or any experience, are the things that happen. They're the things that we're exposed to, but trauma is how my brain and my body respond to that experience. So what we know about trauma is that it happens on a sensory level, and it can be real or it can be perceived. So I'm going to say that one more time. It happens on a sensory level. So let me give you an example. If I'm making this up. If I was a 2-year-old and I was exposed to sexual abuse, and my perpetrator wore a certain scent while the abuse was occurring, so a certain cologne, let's just say, and now I'm 45 and I'm walking down the street and I smell something and all of a sudden I start hiding in the bushes. And my friend comes over to me and says, Tonya, why are you hiding in the bushes? And my answer, like many of the youth that you work with answer when you ask them why they did what they did, would be, I don't know. And there is a significant possibility that I logically, on my upstairs brain, don't know why I'm hiding in the bushes. But my body and my brain know that I'm hiding because I smelled the same scent that I had smelled when I was being exposed to abuse. And that's really important because our triggers often happen on a sensory level as well. And so what happens in the brain is that your brain and your amygdala, which we're going to talk about here in a minute, are firing and saying safety, safety, safety. You're in danger, and your body reacts. There's a wonderful book out there that's called The Body Keeps the Score. And I think that this is really important because trauma is more about how my brain integrates the experience. And my brain can either integrate the experience and make logic, reasoning, and meaning out of it. And all the neural pathways in my brain can be really connected. And then that stressor, that toxic stress, gets released and it's not as activated in my brain. Or it can get stuck in my brain. And that activation is really, really big. And then my triggers that come through happen on a sensory level and can be very big as well. So let's talk a minute about the brain, because you've already heard me reference upstairs, downstairs brain, and I think that it's important for us to really demonstrate what I'm talking about. So I'm going to do a hand model of my brain, if you guys can see my hand. So first I'm going to talk about this as my upstairs brain. So if you take kind of my my lower fingers, I should say, all the way to my upper fingers, and you see how it goes around. Dr. Siegel does a lot of this work, but they talk about that is my upstairs brain. Their terminology is called my prefrontal, or my cortex, if you will. Research is showing that your cortex gets fully developed when you are 25. And so I think that that is really important to consider. It is the last thing in the brain to start to develop. So we actually develop bottom up in the brain. And that really explains like 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds and tantrums, because I would say that they're living more in their downstairs brain, their emotional brain, their reactive brain, their impulsive brain. And we as caregivers really work to help them connect to their upstairs brain and start to develop that upstairs brain. But your upstairs brain is the very thing that helps you be an adult. It helps you be responsible. It helps you plan and organize things. It helps you remember to bring a pencil to class and be responsible. So your upstairs brain is really helpful for you to be able to adult in the world and be a high-functioning individual. We really also can call that your executive functioning. Now, when we start to go down in the lower levels of your brain, my thumb here is something that we call my limbic region. Your limbic region houses your memory, but most importantly, it houses something that we call your amygdala, which is like an almond-shaped thing here in the back part of your brain. And your amygdala is responsible for your fight, flight, and freeze response. So let me give you an example. If I was walking down the street and I saw a really big yellow bus coming, I would jump back in about a millisecond, because my amygdala would have said big yellow bus and I would jump back. And it would save my life. And if my upstairs brain, or my prefrontal cortex, or frontal lobe were in charge, what it would have done is start to logically process what was happening. Like, Tonya, bus coming towards you, it's big, yellow, wheels on the bus go round and round, right? And I would have already been hit by the bus. So in that instance, I don't want my upstairs brain in charge. So what I want is my amygdala to help me jump back. And in that instance, I'm really thankful for my amygdala. But what happens for children and others who have been exposed to adverse experience and that have trauma is that their brain and their amygdala is often saying big yellow bus when there is no real big yellow bus there. Remember, trauma is real or perceived, and it happens on a sensory level. So oftentimes their amygdala is saying big yellow bus and having their body react to that, even though there's not a real safety threat there, but there is a perceived safety threat. So we see this all the time with veterans who come back from war and they hear loud noises and all of a sudden they're hiding under tables, even though there is no real bomb or IUD going off. And so I think this is really important because oftentimes we get very confused as caregivers and youth service workers and clinicians as to why our clients are responding the way they are. And what I would say is that their brain is responding saying that there is a big yellow bus. And then the last part is the reptilian brain, which is the first thing to start to get developed. It's responsible for our vital functioning. The important things to remember with the brain is that we're a brain-body matching machine. What I mean by that is that we all have something called a window of tolerance. It is our ability to withstand stress, if you will. So let's pretend that this is my window, or hey, there's a window right behind me. If each of us have a window of tolerance that is different sizes. It depends on our day. It depends on our interactions. It depends on if we got a good enough sleep and we eat healthy. But what the reality is that we all have a window of tolerance, and it's our ability to withstand that stress. So let's pretend this bucket was our ability to withstand certain stressors that are coming in, and every stressor that came in was another drop in the bucket. And if the stressor was bigger, it's a bigger drop in the bucket. And eventually, every single person cannot have a bucket that is ever growing. At some point, that water is going to start to spill out. And we call that then, Dr. Siegel calls it flipping your lid, or you're out of now your window of tolerance. And what research shows us is that when you're out of your window of tolerance, you typically go to either externalizing or internalizing. So let me explain this. Externalizing means that you are demonstrating behaviors externally. So those are the youth that you see are like flipping tables, or punching things, or running away, or screaming and yelling. The other is internalizing, which means you go inside. It's like those youth that you work with that you say kind of earth to Tonya, and Tanya's not really there. It's a form of dissociation at times. And the reality is that the children who have been exposed to toxic stress and adverse experiences and that have trauma is that their window of tolerance is often really small. And so a lot of people I work with will say, well, he goes from 0 to 100 in just a millisecond. And I'd say, yeah, that means that the window is really small, and then he goes to what we call kind of flooding. And so your emotions, your sensations in your body feel really, really big and are really hard to manage. So now your body is responding in the only way it knows how. And that really comes from an inability or a lacking of skills on how to regulate your sensations and regulate your feelings. And so that's really, really important to hold on to, is that idea of regulation, but also that children do not get to choose how they manage their affect. So what I mean is that you will have some kids and their natural tendency is to go to externalizing. I know that most kids I work with would say, I wish that I could just stay and go inside myself and just disconnect or just avoid. I hate that I start fighting, or I start screaming and I start yelling. And so there's a lot of shame that's connected with how our brains and our bodies start to respond to those stressors, or that perceived sense of lack of safety or lack of control. And so lots of times, unfortunately, as adults, we perpetuate that shame by saying, why did you do that? You know better. That is a bad behavior. And just being really cautious when we are dropping seeds of resilience, that we are connected to the strengths inside someone and how we can connect them with abilities to regulate themselves and feel more in control of those sensations and those feelings. And then those behaviors. So we're going to look at how this regulation occurs in the human body. So let's look at baby A, who has, I hate the word normal, but let's say a normal infant trust cycle, which means the baby demonstrates a lot of different cues to show their needs. What that could look like is they could be crying, or they could be fussing, or they could be wiggling about. You see on their face that they're starting to get distressed. And so a caregiver does a lot of things to try to meet that child's needs, right? They could rock them or sing to them or nurse them or change their diaper. But what happens over time is that baby learns, while the world is predictable, it's safe, I can get my needs met, and I'm capable. And this doesn't happen for a baby on a logical upstairs brain level. It's not cognitive yet. But what happens is it's on a sensory level. So on a feeling level in the body, that baby learns I can get my needs met. And regulation starts to occur through the adult or the caregiver co-regulating. Right? It's very instinctual for us as caregivers to hold that baby, to show them eye contact, to connect with them in order to help them re-regulate or to calm themselves down. And we do that through human interaction in our relationship. And so let's look at baby B, who potentially has a more toxic stress cycle, and where they're showing the same need, but instead, due to a variety of reasons that you guys listed before, a caregiver is not meeting that need consistently. So it could be because there's violence in the home, or mental health, or substance use, or a lot of different reasons. And so that baby inconsistently is responded to. What happens in that baby's brain, again in their downstairs brain, is that they start to learn that the world is not safe, it's not predictable, that baby can't get its needs met, and their ability to regulate becomes pretty haywire. And I think this is important because attachment theory believes that all regulation and a human's ability to soothe and calm yourself happens through co-regulation. It happens through another person attuning to you, and then you learn those skills. What started to happen in some cultures and societies is that we believe that if you push kids and they go to isolation, or you leave them to themselves, they can learn how to regulate on their own. They'll figure it out. And what really shows in brain scans when we monitor cortisol, or the hormone of stress in a human's brain, is that regulation most typically is happening through mirror neurons, and someone learning how to regulate through another regulatory person. So I often show a video at this time of Dr. Tronick in this still face paradigm. We can't show it today, but I hope that you can see the link and go watch it. What Dr. Tronick did in his work is that he had a baby and a mother start to interact. They were playing together, and then they had the mother do a still face. So the mother is not responding to the baby and not interacting. And you'll see in the video that the baby starts to become very distressed. I would say start to climb out their window of tolerance, and the baby starts to scream and wiggle their body. You can just see the stress on the baby. And then the mother re-engages and starts to connect again, and the baby starts to regulate through that interaction. And that's really what we're talking about here, because what happens, I believe, for children who we work with, they are often in 7-year-old or 14-year-old or 21-year-old bodies, and they do not know how to regulate themselves because they have not had the life experiences or the interactions and relationships that help them learn how to regulate. Because it is a learned skill that happens through relationships. And so what starts to happen for those children, and we're really talking about children with significant adverse experiences in trauma, developmental, like ongoing complex trauma, is what happens is a term that we call private logic. And private logic really started to develop out of Adlerian and Adler theory. And private logic is how I see myself, how I see others, and how I see the world around me. So I'm going to say that one more time. How I see myself, how I see others, and how I see the world around me. In that very first slide I showed you, our private logic is developed based off of our experiences. So my external messages become my internal realities. I learn patterns based on my environment and based on my interactions. So what this means is, I'm going to make this up. If I am 3 years old and I am potty training and I have an accident and my caregiver starts to scream and yell and say, Tonya, how could you? You need to get the hang of this, and shows me my dirty underwear in my face and says, Tonya, your sister was potty trained way before now, and cortisol is dumping in my brain because that is a scary interaction and stressful. What happens for me in my brain is that I don't have the cognitive ability to say, hey, well, caregiver, I am developmentally different than my sister. I'm going to get the hang of potty training in about 2 months. Be patient with me. What happens instead, and could happen, is that that message becomes my private logic. Is I am not good enough, I am not smart, I am not capable, I am not as good as my sister. Because I am just an input brain, remember, cognitively. So my external message becomes my internal reality. So the best way I have to describe this is a concept from Inside Out, the movie Inside Out. What happens in Inside Out is that Riley has a lot of life experiences. They create gold balls. So every experience that she has is a gold ball, and she has tens of thousands of gold balls. But what you see happen in the movie is that the more like experiences she has, it turns into a blue ball, which means that it's a core memory, and then it creates an island in her world. Or if you know brain science, it creates a neural pathway. And so a lot of her experiences you see on the slides here, she has a hockey island and a friendship island and a family island. And depending on the majority of her experiences, depends on how big the island is. So you see in the movie that that family island is the biggest island that she has. And what it would show in the movie is that it's the biggest island because she's had the most experiences related to family. So let's talk about this in the context of trauma, because children with trauma also have islands, but their islands could be saying very different things. It could say fear, or lonely, or isolated, or control, or power, or like parentification if they have to take care of other siblings. Well, what private logic is that your islands start to shape how you interact with others, how you experience the world. And you'll see that in Inside Out. They say the islands of personality are what make Riley, Riley. The beautiful thing about resilience that we're going to talk about now is that islands in Inside Out changed over time. Some islands dropped off. Riley got new islands. And I believe that is the power of resilience. That children come to us with trauma and adverse experiences, but the way that we interact with them and the way that we provide experiences and relationships with them can offer them new islands. It can offer them new stories and new narratives and new lenses to wear that are sending the message, you are capable, you are lovable, you are worthy, you are smart, and you are kind, and you are great. And so it is about how do we start to shift that lens? How do we take a philosophical shift in the way that we view children who come with big behaviors? What collaborative problem solving and Dr. Ross Green and Stuart Avon talk about is that all behavior is a need and all behavior is communication. So if instead we wore the lens of curiosity and said, I'm going to be really curious about what that behavior means because I know it's connected to a story and connected to experiences and connected to islands that have shaped who you are, but I also know that you have the potential and you have the capability of developing new stories and new islands, and that's a really beautiful thing. So we're going to do a poll now. Miss Evelyn is going to bring up a poll that asks you a question. Why is this philosophical shift such an important thing for the work that we do with youth? So if you want to start to type your answers as to the importance around this philosophical shift. Some things that you might start typing in is that the shift helps us be rooted in curiosity around a child's story. Or this shift helps us see the whole child. Yeah, absolutely. Viewing the child in more empathetic ways. I love that it removes blame culture. That's so significant. Make meaning, yes. We talk a lot in the work that we do that when we can give meaning and purpose in a child's life, that they can achieve such beautiful things. Shift from symptom to signal. Yeah, absolutely. Guys, this is just lovely. This is wonderful. Thank you so much for typing things in and adding your knowledge and your expertise, because this is such great resources for everyone here. So we're going to keep moving along as we are here in our last 15 minutes of the presentation. So what we know about resilience, though, is that although we can't take away what a child has experienced, we can absolutely give them new experiences that start to shape their brain in a new way. The beautiful thing is that our brains are the most plastic thing in the human body, so it's never too late for healing and to happen and for resilience to be cultivated, and that gives me incredible hope every single day in the work that we do. So we're going to have you listen to an audio clip now of a youth that we served in our school-based program for therapy.
Before going to therapy, I was angry a lot. I got into fights at school, I shut down and acted tough. But really, I was sad and lonely. I didn't feel like I had anyone to talk to, and I didn't understand how all my feelings were okay. I didn't feel good about who I was or what I was doing. I felt out of control. I didn't trust anyone. Then I started to meet with my therapist and started to feel like she cared about me and who I was. I felt like I could start to trust her and felt good after seeing her. I wrote her this letter explaining how I felt. Thanks for always helping me understand things or how to control myself. Without you, I wouldn't know how to control my feelings or understand how others are feeling with help and help them. I am really happy that you are my therapist and others, because without you, a lot of students wouldn't know how to control themselves or talk about their feelings with someone. You are a really smart and amazing person. I'm glad I met you in 6th grade, but I wish I had met you a long time ago. Thank you for everything you've helped me with, and keep on changing people's lives and touching their hearts. I gave her that letter, and I feel a lot better now about who I am because my therapist believed in me.
I think it's just such a beautiful illustration of the power that we can have in a young person's life or in anyone's life. A huge shout out to Maggie Hartzler, who was that therapist, and the significantly beautiful work that she does with human souls. And so it really takes us to what we consider the U intervention. The U intervention is all about that you are the number one tool in a child's life. When we talk about resilience, it is incredibly research indicative that the key element of a child or an adult saying that they were resilient was that they had a significant person in their life that they could trust, and that they felt loved them, cared for them, valued them, and was there for them. And so oftentimes we try to make resilience complicated, and the reality is that you are the number one pathway toward cultivating resilience in another human's life. And I think that that is such a powerful, powerful, beautiful thing, because when we can see the beauty in someone else, when we can see their strengths and their power and their potential, we can use our relationship to highlight all the amazing things about them and cultivate that resilience. So this is important because it's not that other interventions aren't important or that other research or other tools aren't really significant, but if first the relationship isn't there, those other things are not going to be as effective. That first, the relationship and the feeling of safety has to be the number one thing as the foundation for all the other work. So what is that other work around resilience? We call this kind of the 201 and the U intervention. Because when we started to do this work, a lot of educators and care providers that I worked with would say, Tonya, you know, I'm doing all the things that you talked about. I'm talking to the downstairs brain. I am trying to have a relationship, and I'm really having a hard time. And so when I would go observe, I would see that really the barrier and the thing that was in the way was that adult was often triggered by that youth, and triggered for a lot of different reasons. And so I think what I started to discover several years back in this work is, how do we lead people through their own self-discovery? How do we lead people to their own understanding of themselves, their own self-awareness, so that they can be an expert on their own life? Not the life of others, but understand themselves so deeply that they know the things that could be a barrier or a protective mechanism from truly connecting with the kid or a youth in the way that serves the youth the best possible. I talk about a situation where I was really nervous and anxious to see a kiddo for therapy. Every time that she would come in, I would feel the sensations of anxiety, and I went to my supervisor at the time and said, I'm having a really hard time. And she said, not everyone is meant to have a connecting relationship, and so if you need to transfer or discharge, you can. And if you know anything about me, I'm really stubborn, and so I said, no, I'm not going to discharge this client because this is on me. I need to understand what's going on with me. And I stumbled upon the book at the time, Parenting from the Inside Out by Dr. Siegel. And it was before I was a parent, but the book was life-changing for me. And what it said is that our experiences in life absolutely shape how then we have relationships, how we interact with others. And I started this quest of self-discovery, of understanding my own values, my triggers, my personality traits, my own private logic. So if I felt not good enough as a therapist and a client was saying, I really hate coming to therapy, it was absolutely going to pry on my own insecurities and beliefs that I had about myself that I struggled with. And so I really, really encourage you to do a lot of self-exploration and understand, what are those triggers for you? What is going on for you? What is the story that you're telling yourself when you go into an interaction that is difficult for you, or when you have a relationship that is difficult for you? Brene Brown does so much of this work, so use her as a resource, but really having that self-awareness and then that self-care for yourself. I say you can't give out of a bucket that isn't full, and so understanding how you are in your own wellness and taking care of yourself and having relationships in a village that allow you to give yourself grace and love so that you can pass it on to others. The other part of the 201 is something we call curiosity and perception checking. And I'm gonna reference a beautiful soul named Holly Green. She wrote a book about this idea of the ladder of inference. And what she said is that the ladder of inference says that in every interaction or every experience that we have, 10% of that is fact and 90% is our own perception. So it's like our own glasses that we wear, you know, like it is our own bias, our own assumptions, our own belief system, our own private logic, which is made up of our own experiences. So if you are not aware of your own bias and perceptions and assumptions and beliefs about the world, then you are going to go into interactions and automatically assume 90% of things. And so if you've ever seen the video Brain Busters on Netflix, it's very funny. But they had 20 people experience something and then interviewed all 20. And all 20 were willing to give like their firstborn child that what they saw was accurate. And they showed them the video back and none of them were accurate. You know, some of them said, oh, they were wearing a yellow coat, or it was a female, and none of them were 100% accurate, which I really think speaks to Holly Green's term of ladder of inference, that when our brains and our amygdalas are also experiencing stress, which when we interact with a youth that has big behaviors, your amygdala is also going off. that you have to be really rooted and grounded and centered and working on your own regulation, and then being just really, really curious about what they're experiencing, what their life is like, what their reality is, because they are the expert of their own lives. And so I think that this curiosity is one of the most core elements in the work that we do to help foster resilience. Then we talk about paying attention to the strengths. And I always say the quote, what you pay attention to grows. I'm going to say it again, what you pay attention to grows. If you are frustrated with a child, you're going to find negative behavior, because misery loves company, and we want to validate ourselves. We want to prove ourselves right, and that's okay. It's just human nature. But it doesn't help children then be resilient. So rather than focusing on the struggles you're having with that child or the negativity that that child is demonstrating, I make myself find 5, 10 positive things. And that when I see something negative, I make myself see 3 more positive things, because what you pay attention to grows. And when you are able to reflect back someone's beauty and their greatness and the positive strengths inside of them and their abilities, they are more likely to be resilient. And then the power of you being genuine and sincere and authentic, coming into relationships with your why behind the work, the why behind your passions and your love for what you do, and knowing that vulnerability, saying, I'm not the expert, I'm having a hard time, you're having anger, and I feel really nervous, and I care a lot about you, bringing ultimately humanness into the human interaction. And lots of times that we forget this, we get a little bit robotic, and so really bringing who you are into the relationship, and then having an accountability partner, someone who, again, along with self-care, gives you grace and love, and is able to really help you with that discovery and help you see the beauty. So how do we foster resilience with the brain and mind for those we work with? Let's pretend the upstairs brain is Spanish speaking and the downstairs brain is English speaking, and you go up to a kid who is aggressive and yelling. They are in their downstairs brain, right? And you go and you say, buddy, if you keep having these behaviors, I'm going to have to call your mom. You, as the adult, are in your upstairs brain. There's nothing wrong with saying that, but what Dr. Siegel would say is that when you speak Spanish to someone who speaks English, that can be quite frustrating, right? And so how do you first talk to the downstairs brain in order to get the youth to the upstairs brain? And so Dr. Siegel gives you a little bit of a recipe. He says, first, just be present. Do deep breathing yourself. You have to first be regulated in order to regulate someone else. So do deep breathing and connect. And then do attunement and reflection, paraphrasing, validating. So what that looks like if the student says, I'm saying student, but if they say, I hate you, this class is dumb. Saying, you're really, really frustrated. You feel like this class is really, really stupid. Yeah, and I hate you. You're the worst educator I've ever had. Yeah, you really, really are mad at me right now. This is really hard for you. And doing it in an empathetic, caring way, not a robotic way, but in a way that says, I care about where you are right now. The importance of this recipe is that when you reflect, when you paraphrase, what you are doing for that child is helping them gain insight into their own current state, their own feelings, their own words, potentially their own sensations, and you're helping them integrate their brain, which is really big for children of trauma because they don't have a well-integrated brain. They are not able to access impulse control and regulation and logic in the midst of emotions very well. So when you do this, you give them an opportunity to start to develop that emotional intelligence that's needed for resilience. And most in particularly, you're sending the message that no matter how you feel right now, no matter who you are right now, you are lovable and you are worthy to be exactly as you are, and to help them regulate their brain. So I'll tell you a scenario. I have a 13-year-old niece. I came home from work one day and she was eating on my couch. I have a rule, no eating on my couch. I know, silly, but I come in, I say, Beans, get your tuckets to the kitchen. And she goes, no, I'm watching my show. Now, I take some deep breaths and I regulate myself because I'm a little frustrated because I felt like that was disrespectful, if you will. But I know that that is my own stuff. And so I go, I put my hand on her shoulder and I say, yeah, you're saying right now that the rule doesn't matter. She says, I'm not saying that, Auntie. What I'm saying is that I'm watching my show. Please leave me alone. I say, right now you're saying you just want to be left alone. But I care about you and I see that you're frustrated. She goes, oh, Auntie, honestly, not this therapy stuff. And I say, yeah, right now you just want to be alone. You're watching TV. And it seems as though then the rule to not eat on the couch doesn't matter. She says, I'm not saying it doesn't matter. And she starts crying. I say, you're feeling really, really sad. And she goes, yeah, no one sat next to me during lunch today. And I said, oh my goodness, Beans, that is really sad and that is really hard. Let's go to the kitchen and talk about it because you're not going to eat in my living room. And it's not that I don't get to the expectations or the rules, but how I get there looks very different. How I get there allows an opportunity for her to be aware of her own sensations, her own emotions, her own behaviors. We went to the kitchen and we had an amazing chance to talk about what she can do tomorrow if no one sits next to her and what she can do with her feelings of sadness. And it gave her a chance to gain insight, and it gave her a chance to gain empathy into me and how I felt. And most importantly, it gave us a chance to have repair. And it gave a chance for her brain to be integrated and for resilience to occur. So we're going to really end with this last part. If trauma happens on a sensory level, healing and resilience happens on a sensory level as well. Provide youth with engagement, involvement in activities. Have them be connected to norms and high values and why it's really important so that they can gain insight and importance around it. Having them be connected to their community and be connected to trusting adults. Having them be really connected to things that offer them enrichment. And sensory things, so movement and play and exercise. I'm going to ramble some things off, right? Like doing sensory walks. Tell me 5 things you see, 4 things you hear, 3 things that you can touch. Doing mindfulness, doing swinging or sitting on a ball versus a chair or fidget items. Teaching people deep breathing and how to be aware of their sensations. I say all the time, I'm feeling really anxious. I have butterflies in my tummy. Those butterflies are red. If they could be a symbol, it would be like a square. You know, just connecting sensory things to logic and to the upstairs brain. Art and music and reading. I love that, Eve. Having them in clubs and enrichments and doing gratitude activities, doing journaling, connecting with others. And knowing that the 3 most regulatory things is 1, making sure that essential needs are met, food and water, then movement, and then breathing, being connected to oxygen. Often we are disconnected from our body in those ways. So always reach out. Don't ever hesitate to reach out if you have questions or you would like resources. I'm going to end right here in the last minute with a description. I usually show a Moana video, if any of you have ever seen Moana. And what happens in Moana at the very end is Moana is trying to restore the heart of Te Fiti. But she can't get to restore the heart to Te Fiti because Takai, a lava monster, is there. And this lava monster is big and it is ferocious and it is angry and it is looking to destroy anything that comes in its way. And what Moana notices is that Te Fiti, the lava monster, is missing a heart. And so she holds the heart up and she says to the water, let Takai come to me. And the water splits and Takai comes raging at her. And Moana is singing a beautiful song and says, they have stolen the heart from inside you. I know who you are. And Takai gets up to her and pauses, and Moana says, I know who you truly are, and puts the heart back into Takai, who is Te Fiti. And the lava breaks off, and Te Fiti comes as this beautiful, beautiful woman who is there to restore all the island's greatness. And to me, that is the most metaphoric example of trauma and resilience. Kids come with really big behaviors. They come with a lot of pain and a lot of sadness. And then when we, as caring, loving, nurturing individuals, and individuals who give opportunities to see that child's greatness, to see the heart that is truly there, full of light and love, when we can show that and reflect that, endless things are possible for youth and for anyone who is looking to cultivate their resilience. So I feel so honored and privileged to have shared this information with you today. You've been such a wonderful group. Thank you so much for your time, and please reach out if you have any questions or any needs. Thank you so much.